Welcome back. So let's talk about the life of the Proterozoic. Still not a ton going on, but definitely more than what we saw in the Archean. Let's get this going. I tell you what, before we jump into it too further, let's give you part of the super secret code. It is the number 1. The number 1. You got me? The number 1. Okay. So remember the Paleoproterozoic about 2.5 to 1.6 billion years ago. And the life that we start to see in the Paleoproterozoic are still mostly prokaryotes, meaning they do not have a cell nucleus. They do not have organelles on the inside, like mitochondria and ribosomes and all those sorts of things, if you remember biology. They are small, and they're not nearly as complex as eukaryotic cells, which will come next. So these are still, very simple archaea and bacteria. All right, like the cyanobacteria, which became common, that formed stromatolites. There's a lack of biodiversity due to asexual reproduction. They just kind of split and replicate. There's not necessarily DNA that is altered to change to create diversity. So evolution is slow. So for a billion years, it's just kind of this stuff. Right? It's just kind of cyanobacteria and ancient archaic stuff. So this is a prokaryotic cell. Again, it has some DNA floating around, but it's very simple. You'll see as it's compared to eukaryotic cells. But again, just simple bacteria, cyanobacteria that form stromatolites. This is a kind of a slice, a cross-section. If you're looking straight down at stromatolites, it looks like a couple of columns connected together. So again, not much going on in the Paleoproterozoic, but hey, it's life. And then we get into the Mesoproterozoic, about 1.6 to 1 billion years ago. And we start to get the evolution of eukaryotic cells. So eukaryotes are much larger than prokaryotic cells. They do have an internal membrane-bound nucleus, so nucleus to contain the DNA, not the DNA that's floating around in the prokaryotic cell. And you are starting to get kind of some of those other internal structures not found in prokaryotes, mitochondria, chloroplasts, those sorts of things. Now, what we start to see with eukaryotic organisms, so in many eukaryotes, they're now multicelled, where prokaryotic cells are usually just one single cell. Eukaryotes are becoming multicelled, so now we're starting to finally get organisms that are made up of multiple cells instead of just one. And they're also aerobic. They require oxygen for some process. And remember, now around this time, finally after the banded iron formations sucked up all the iron, sucked up all the oxygen, and that stopped around 2 billion years. More free oxygen was available, not in the atmosphere, but in the oxygen, starting around 1.8 billion years ago. So that coincides nicely here with the rise of the eukaryotic cells, since a lot of them require oxygen. And now most of them reproduce sexually, so there's sexual reproduction, a sharing of DNA, which is going to increase the rate of evolution. But it was still slow, still not much going on. So the eukaryotic cell, when we do the cell diagrams in biology class in 9th grade or 10th grade or 7th grade or whenever the heck you do that, mostly it's usually of a eukaryotic cell, animal cell. So there are, and I touched on this in a previous unit, there's 6 different kingdoms that are recognized. But only 3 domains. So all of life is either kind of bacteria, archaea, or eukarya, meaning all these things have eukaryotic cells. These 2 are prokaryotic, very simple organisms, and only 1 is eukaryotic. Now, there's a lot of plants and animals and fungi and all that kind of stuff, but, there's much more of this than there is of this. So some ancient eukaryotic fossil cells. The oldest one found is 1.2 billion years old in rocks in Canada. There you go with Canada again. These are known as Bangiomorpha. They were still single-celled, but probably reproduced sexually. They represent modern-day kind of red algae. Right? But eukaryotic cells would eventually evolve to many of them evolve to be multi celled. So, now that we're getting into the Neoproterozoic, which existed from about 1 billion to about a half a billion years ago, to the end of the Proterozoic. Now, for sure, we're getting the evolution of multicelled organisms, of these eukaryotic cells. They're made up of many cells, but it could be as little as 4. So, this is an example of an organism, Gonium, made up of just 4 cells. Volvox, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cells. But, just like humans or other organisms, billions and trillions of cells. What we're starting to see in these multicelled organisms is that cells begin to have specific function. Like we have blood cells, in fact, red blood cells, white blood cells, skin cells. All of these different cells have different functions, and we're starting to see that in the Neoproterozoic. We have cells strictly for reproduction and respiration and breathing, and so we're starting again to see that. And also in the Neoproterozoic, we finally start to get the first animals that exist on Earth. And the first fossils of animals come from the Ediacaran fauna of Australia. So the first fossil evidence we find is in these old rocks in Australia. Canada and Australia, just a wealth of geologic information. The Ediacaran is actually this, if we broke down the Neoproterozoic into different periods, the Ediacaran is this last little chunk here from about 635 to 541 million years ago. And this is when we finally start to see multicelled organisms. We start to see a diversification of life, visible life, and all this Ediacaran fauna. And you've actually been looking at it the whole time in this lecture. It's all this stuff in this background. These soft body things, these soft body plants and jellyfish and these things floating around in the shallows of the ocean. So, in 1947, impressions of soft-bodied animals were found in the Ediacara hills of southern Australia and quartzite. Quartzite is metamorphosed sandstone. So this sandstone, this marine sandstone, indicates a shallow marine environment. And so these fossils are found in, what was once sandstone, but now that sandstone has been metamorphosed, but we still get those fossils, those fossil impressions, those imprints within those casts within the metamorphic quartzite, which was once sandstone that underwent a little bit of heat and pressure. Additional discoveries turned up a number of things, many bearing no resemblance to any existing organisms now. These type of fossils, now called the Ediacaran fauna. Fauna is animal. There's flora, which is plants, and fauna, which is kind of animal. Or living organisms, I should say, or animal organisms. And so so these fossils, these Ediacaran fossils, have been found on all continents except for Antarctica, and again are collectively referred to as the Ediacaran fauna. They're, again, not too common because these are soft-bodied organisms and they lack skeletons or a lot of times other hard structures. And the things that tend to fossilize better are the things with harder substance to it. So they're kind of rare. They are old, but more so that since they're soft-bodied, it really takes the right depositional environment, originally 600 million years ago, the right circumstances for all of this the right burial circumstances for all this to occur, the right circumstances for the sediment to lithify and turn to stone. So they're not as common as we would see later fossils, and that's one reason why. So here's some impressions of all of these fossils. Again, these are all kind of soft body little things. This thing looks like a little anchor here, kind of these spiral arms, these segmented things. And a little cartoon drawing. So this is what the shallows of the ocean floor might have looked like. Again, these are all very soft-bodied organisms. These soft kind of celled plants. Don't have a structure. They just kind of flow back and forth with the water. So all very kind of soft-bodied stuff. So all known Proterozoic animals were soft-bodied. Some evidence that the early stage of skeletons was underway, so starting to get there as we move into the Cambrian, out of the Precambrian now into the Cambrian. Some Ediacaran animals may have had chitinous carapace, which that's the same things that some bugs have. That's what makes bugs crunchy when you squish them. They have kind of that crunchy shell. That's a chitinous carapace. So some Ediacaran animals may have had that crunchy stuff. Others appear to have had at least areas of calcium carbonate, maybe some sort of shells or proto-shells or something along the lines of getting there. There's an odd creature known as Kimberella, had a tough outer coating similar to that of some present-day marine invertebrates. So it's kind of like not just like a shell, but more of kind of a tough, kind of quasi-leathery coating. More durable skeletons did not appear in the fossil records into the beginning of the Phanerozoic eon, the beginning of the Paleozoic, again starting around 541 million years ago, and we'll talk about that sort of life in Unit 10. So here's a Kimberella. So here's a fossil of it, and it's relatively small. And so this is kind of an image of what it may have looked like. Again, mostly soft bodies with kind of a shell-like hard structure on the outside, just kind of floating around the shallows of the ocean. So of what we start to see in the Ediacaran, 3 present-day phyla may be represented in the Ediacaran fauna. Phyla are categories of animal life. The jellyfish, which make up the phylum, I think it's Cnidaria, like the C is silent. Segmented worms, Annelida, and primitive members of the arthropod phylum. This is the phylum, the subsect of organisms that contain insects, spiders, crabs, other things. One Ediacaran fossil, Spergina, these words are killing me. The Spergina has been cited as possible evidence of trilobites. If you're not sure what a trilobite is, I'll show you here in just a second. Another primitive member of the phylum Echinodermata, which are what starfish are as well, maybe have been represented. So we're starting to see what would evolve into these other things pop up in the Ediacaran. So this is the kind of ancestor of what would become the trilobite as we get into the Phanerozoic eon. Tell you what, let me give you another part of the super secret code. It is the number, 9. The number 9. You got me? The number 9. So just a little slice of life. Things are now starting to get going. We're now starting to see visible life. Again, even these things are very small. This is only a couple of centimeters in length. These are very small fossils, very small organisms. It takes time to get bigger and bigger and bigger and under different conditions. But yeah, we're starting to see animals, multi-celled life, animals, and this is still all relegated to the oceans. In fact, there's no, on land, there's nothing. There's no plants on land. Everything is in the oceans as of right now, as of what we're speaking, as we're kind of ending the Proterozoic eon. So let's go ahead and pause here. When we come back, we'll have one more video, one last section on mineral deposits, a few important mineral deposits that occurred during the Proterozoic eon. I'll see you back here in just a second.